5 alien captains mocked Earth. They thought Earth was defeated. Moments later, human fleet arrived. The sky above Earth was full of broken metal. Pieces of old satellites and dead warships turned slowly in the black, catching the weak light of the sun. Down below, the cities were dark. Power grids had failed in most regions. Only a few lights blinked from underground bunkers like small stars refusing to die. It had been 40 days since the alien fleets came. They called themselves the CTH Dominion, and they had crossed the stars in 5 great mother ships, each one commanded by a captain, who believed they were about to make history. Their commanders had studied Earth for over a decade through hidden probes. They knew about human wars, human politics, human weakness. They believed humanity was a species that could talk a great deal, but could not truly fight when the moment came. The first attack had been swift. Human orbital defense stations built over 60 years of careful engineering were gone within the first 6 hours. The CTH ships were faster, their shields stronger, their weapons more advanced by at least 2 centuries of technology. Earth's finest generals had watched on their screens as one station after another turned to fire and silence. By the 10th day, 3 continents had gone dark. By the 20th day, the last of Earth's visible battle fleet, a group of 40 ships called the Atlas Guard, had been destroyed near the orbit of the moon. It was the last real resistance anyone on the enemy side had seen. After that, there was nothing. No signals, no ships, no fight. The CTH Dominion believed the war was over. Now, 5 mother ships hung in a loose circle above the Pacific Ocean. So massive that from the ground they looked like new moons. Inside the flagship named the Devourer of Light, a meeting was about to begin. It was a meeting the 5 captains had been looking forward to for weeks. It was the celebration meeting, the victory meeting. Captain Threx Vayer of the Devourer of Light sat at the head of a long obsidian table shaped like a curved blade. He was a tall being, nearly 8 feet, with gray-blue skin and eyes that glowed faintly amber in dim light. He wore heavy dark armor decorated with the medals of 40 conquered worlds. Earth would be the 41st and by far the easiest. Around the table, holographic images flickered to life, showing the other 4 captains from their own ships. The first to appear was Captain Sorenth Ka, commander of the Iron Verdict, a squat and powerfully built alien with 3 eyes arranged in a triangle on his face. He laughed before he even finished speaking a greeting. "Threx," he said, his voice a deep grinding sound. "I have been waiting for this call all week. Tell me the numbers are as good as the rumors." "Better," Threx said, allowing himself the faintest smile. "Human resistance, based on our scans, has fallen to less than 2% of what it was on day 1. Their command centers are silent. Their so-called capital cities send us only static. We believe their government has fully collapsed." The second hologram flickered in. Captain Yulara Thies of the Silent Reaper, a slender alien with pale skin and long fingers that moved constantly, as if she were always calculating something in her head. She did not laugh like Sorenth. She simply nodded slowly, satisfied. "I told my crew a month ago this would not take long," she said. "Humans are loud before a fight and quiet after one. It seems I was right again." The third hologram showed Captain Doran Kez of the Black Tide, a heavy-set alien whose face was covered in ritual battle scars, each one representing an enemy fleet he had personally destroyed in his 300 years of service. He crossed his thick arms. "I still say we should not have wasted so much time being careful," Doran grumbled. "We treated this primitive species like they were dangerous. Look at them now, hiding in holes in the ground like insects." The fourth hologram was the strangest of the 5. Captain Vexilin Moth, commander of the Hollow Choir. A being whose face was hidden completely behind a smooth silver mask, and whose voice came out modulated and calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it more frightening than the others. "They fought well for a young species," Vexilin said softly. "It is only fair to admit that, but young things break easily. That is the nature of youth." Threx Vaylor raised a hand and the 4 holograms quieted. "We gather today not simply to boast," he said. "Though I admit, we have earned the right to boast a little." A few of the captains chuckled. "We gather to finalize the terms of division. Earth's remaining resources, its surviving population centers, its territory. All of this must be divided fairly among our 5 houses as agreed before we left Cath space." A large star map appeared above the table showing the blue and green planet turning slowly. Its surface marked with red zones showing destroyed cities and gray zones showing captured territory. Green zones, the last untouched regions, were few and shrinking by the hour on the display. The northern human territories, what they called Europe and North America, will go to House Validar and House Ka, THRE said, gesturing at the map. The southern territories once called South America and Africa to House Thes and House Kez. The eastern regions, Asia, to House Moth, given your fleet position there already. "Generous of you to save the largest slice for yourself," Sorenth said, though there was no real anger in his voice. It was the kind of joke old comrades made with each other. "Someone has to lead," Threx replied smoothly. "And leading means taking the greater burden of governing these creatures once they are fully broken." Doruan snorted, "Governing them as if they will need much governing. A conquered species like this with their spirit crushed usually just needs food and fear to keep them quiet. I have seen it 100 times on other worlds." "They are more stubborn than most," Olara said, tapping one long finger against the table. "My scanners still pick up scattered radio chatter, encrypted, of course, moving between what looks like hidden shelters, small groups. Nothing organized, but stubborn. Let them whisper in their holes," Threx said. "A whisper is not an army. We destroyed their fleet. We destroyed their satellites. We destroyed their command centers. What exactly do they have left to fight with? Sharp sticks and anger." This drew a real laugh from the table, even from the masked Vexillan, whose modulated chuckle sounded strange and hollow through the masked speaker. "I heard," Sorenth said, leaning forward with interest, "that some of my officers picked up a strange broadcast 2 days ago, some human leader giving a speech, something about how humanity would rise again. Very dramatic, very human." He rolled all 3 of his eyes. "They do love their speeches." "What did it say exactly?" Vexillan asked, tilting his masked head slightly. Sorenth waved a hand. "The usual. We will not surrender. We will fight until our last breath. Freedom will return. That sort of thing." My translator officer said it was almost poetic in its own primitive way. "A pity such passion is wasted on a losing cause. Humans are a species built on emotion rather than logic." Olara said that is precisely why they lost so quickly despite their occasional cleverness. A logical species prepares before the war begins. Humans prepared during the war after it had already started. By the time their engineers understood what we were already in orbit. Threx nodded slowly, his amber eyes glowing a little brighter with something like satisfaction. "That has always been the flaw of young disorganized worlds. They fight each other more than they prepare for an outside threat. Earth spent its energy on hundreds of separate nations. Each one distrustful of the others, each one slow to unite even when the danger was clear. By the time they formed anything like a real alliance, we had already broken their orbital shield. A fitting lesson for any species," Doruan said. "Unity comes too late, or not at all." The meeting continued in this manner for some time. The 5 captains trading reports, numbers, boasts, and casual insults toward the defeated planet below. To them, this was simply the final formality before true conquest began, the counting of spoils, the division of territory, the beginning of a new colony that would, in a generation or 2, forget it had ever been called Earth by the strange, short-lived creatures who once lived there. But far below, in a place none of the 5 captain scanners had ever managed to fully map, something else was happening. 12 kilometers beneath the surface of what used to be called Nevada, in a facility carved directly into ancient bedrock. Human engineers moved through corridors lit by soft blue emergency lighting. This was Bastion Deep, one of 17 hidden production sites built not in the weeks after the invasion began, but in the 2 years before it. Ever since a joint team of scientists and generals had picked up faint, unexplainable signals from deep space that no one in the public ever learned about, Earth's governments had not been foolish, whatever the alien captains believed. Long before the Cath Dominion arrived, a small group of leaders across nations, too many to count, had quietly agreed on one simple truth. If the stars ever sent something hostile toward Earth, humanity's greatest weakness would not be a lack of courage. It would be division. So in secret, working through channels hidden from public eye and even from most of their own governments, they built something new. Not a single nation's fleet, not a single company's project. A joint human fleet built with shared technology, shared resources, and shared purpose, hidden deep underground and far out in the solar system, where no probe, however advanced, had thought to look. When the CTH Dominion arrived and began its assault, the visible fleets of Earth, the Atlas Guard, and dozens of national defense forces fought and died exactly as the enemy captains had seen. This had not been an accident. It had been, in the coldest and most painful sense, a plan. Every visible ship destroyed, every visible city darkened, every visible resistance crushed, had bought something precious. Time. Time for the enemy to grow confident. Time for the enemy to grow careless. Time for the true fleet, hidden beneath oceans and inside asteroid belts and behind the far side of the moon to finish what it needed to finish. In Bastion Deep, a woman named Admiral Elena Cho stood before a massive display showing the current positions of the 5 alien mother ships, calmly circling above the Pacific like vultures, certain their prey was already dead. Around her, dozens of officers moved between stations, their faces tired but steady, the look of people who had trained for this exact moment for 2 long years. Confirmed positions locked, said a young officer at the tracking station. All 5 Cath Command ships holding formation above Grid 72 Alpha. No signs of dispersal. Good, Elena said quietly. They are exactly where we need them, together, comfortable, not expecting anything. Beside her stood General Marcus Webb, a broad-shouldered man with a scar along his jaw from the very first week of the invasion when he had barely escaped the destruction of a command bunker in what used to be Washington. He had not smiled in 40 days. He allowed himself the smallest one now. 2 years of building in secret, he said. 2 years of watching our own cities burn on the surface without being able to help, because helping would have meant revealing what we were building down here. I will never forget the faces of the people who didn't understand why we didn't send everything we had. They will understand soon, Elena said. Everyone will understand soon. On the main display, a new set of numbers began counting upward. Not a countdown to 0, but a count of readiness. Ship by ship, fleet by fleet, checking in from positions scattered across the solar system. Ships hidden in the shadow of Jupiter's moons. Ships resting silently on the far side of Mars. Ships buried under kilometers of ice on Europa, powered down to nearly nothing so as not to be detected. Ships hidden even closer than the enemy could imagine, tucked beneath the waves of Earth's own oceans and specially built underwater hangars. All of them all at once were waking up. Signal from the Council, said a communications officer, her voice tight with focus. Final authorization received. All fleet elements report full readiness in approximately 11 minutes. Elena Cho looked at the calm, arrogant faces of the 5 alien captains, still displayed on a secondary screen, still talking, still laughing, still dividing up a planet they believed was already theirs. She thought of the cities destroyed to by this moment. She thought of the soldiers of the Atlas Guard who had fought and died in the first days, not knowing they were part of a larger plan, only knowing they had to hold the line as long as they could. She thought of every family hiding in the dark, waiting for a sign that humanity was not finished. Let them talk, she said quietly. Let them enjoy this meeting. It will be the last one they ever have. General Webb nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the display. How long until the fleet reaches optimal firing position? 10 minutes, Elena said. 10 minutes. And 5 very confident captains are going to learn exactly how wrong they were. Above the Pacific Ocean, inside the Devourer of Light, the 5 holograms continued their meeting, unaware that far beneath the waves and far across the black distances of space, thousands of human ships were beginning to move, silent, patient, and finally, after 2 long years of waiting, ready. Captain Threx Valor raised a glass of dark liquid in a mock toast, and the other 4 captains did the same on their own ships, their images lifting glasses that would never truly touch across the light years between them. To the fall of Earth, THRE said, and to the beginning of a new age for the CTH Dominion. To the fall of Earth, the others repeated, laughter echoing through 5 separate command decks. None of them noticed the faint disturbance rippling across their outer sensor range, small and easy to dismiss as background noise from the planet's own magnetic field. None of them noticed the shape of something enormous beginning to rise from beneath the waves of the ocean below. None of them noticed because none of them were looking for it to understand how confident the 5 captains had become. It helps to look back at the 40 days that came before this meeting because confidence like theirs is never built in a single moment. It is built slowly day after day through reports that all say the same comforting thing. On the first day of the invasion, 5 mother ships had dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. Their arrival detected by every observatory on Earth within minutes. Governments that had spent decades arguing over trade agreements and border disputes suddenly found themselves staring at the same terrifying images on their screens. For a brief chaotic period, humanity had done what humanity often did in the face of disaster, argued about what to do next. The Cath Dominion had not waited for that argument to finish. Their scout ship swept through Earth's outer defense network first, disabling long-range sensors and communication relays with brutal efficiency. Then came the destruction of the orbital stations, followed by a methodical campaign against visible military assets on the ground. Every step of the invasion had been recorded, studied, and reported back to the 5 captains in careful detail, and every report told the same story. Humanity was falling apart exactly as expected. What the reports could not show, because the reports were built entirely from what the Cath sensors were allowed to see, was the second story running underneath the first one. While national governments argued in public, and military commanders gave orders that would be broadcast, recorded, and eventually intercepted by enemy scanners, a much smaller and much quieter group of people had already begun moving pieces into place that no report would ever capture. This group did not have a formal name at first. Later, once the war was over, historians would call it simply the Continuity Council, a name chosen for its plainness rather than for any sense of grandeur. It consisted of a rotating group of scientists, generals, engineers, and a handful of political leaders who had been read into a program most of their own governments did not fully understand. The program had begun 2 years before the invasion after a joint research station on the far side of the moon had detected faint unexplainable signals that no known human technology could produce. At first, the signals were dismissed as instrument error. Then, as they persisted and grew slightly stronger over several months, a small international team was quietly assembled to investigate. What they found was not proof of an invasion, not exactly, but something close enough to prove unsettling evidence that something intelligent, technologically far beyond humanity, had passed through the outer solar system at some point in the last decade, likely on a scouting mission of its own. The Continuity Council's founding members had faced a choice that would define the next 2 years of human history. They could report their findings publicly, triggering panic, political posturing, and almost certainly the kind of fractured competing response that had doomed other moments in human history when unity was needed most. Or they could act quietly, pooling resources across willing nations, building something that could survive contact with a threat no single country could face alone. They chose the second path, and it had not been easy. There had been leaks that needed containing, funding gaps that nearly ended the project twice, and constant, exhausting negotiation between nations that had spent generations distrusting one another. More than once, the entire program had nearly collapsed under the weight of old rivalries. It was only the shared, growing certainty that something was coming, and coming soon that kept enough leaders at the table long enough to finish what they had started. None of this history was visible to the 5 captains circling above the Pacific. All they saw was a planet that had fought hard in its visible military engagements and then gone quiet. Exactly the pattern their intelligence had predicted for a young, disorganized species facing overwhelming force. They had no reason to imagine a second fleet because nothing in their experience with 40 previous conquests had ever prepared them for a species patient enough and united enough to hide one. They believed the war was already over. They were about to learn how wrong they were. On the bridge of the Iron Verdict, Captain Sorenth Ka leaned back in his command chair, still smiling from the toast when one of his sensor officers, a smaller alien named Prees, made a small sound of confusion. "Captain," Prince said, "I am seeing something strange on the deep sensors." Soren did not even turn his head. "Define strange." "A ripple," Prince said, "very faint, coming from beneath the ocean surface, directly below our position. It could be seismic activity. This planet still has active fault lines in this region. Then log it as seismic activity and stop bothering me during a council meeting," Soren said, waving a thick hand. Chris hesitated, glancing at the readout again. The ripple did not look like an earthquake. Earthquakes did not have a rhythm to them, a pattern that repeated every few seconds, almost like something breathing or something powering up. But Prince was young, only in his 3rd year of service, and he did not want to be the officer who interrupted a victory meeting between 5 captains over what was probably nothing. He logged it as seismic activity, just as he was told, and said nothing more. He would think about that moment for the rest of his life, however short it turned out to be. Back at the council table, the conversation had moved from division of territory to smaller matters, supply routes, prisoner processing. The timeline for bringing down colony ships to begin real settlement. Darren Kez was in the middle of a long complaint about the quality of Earth's remaining industrial equipment when Alara suddenly went very still, her long fingers freezing mid-motion above the table. "You?" Threx asked, noticing. "One moment," she said, her pale face turning towards something off-screen, something only she could see on her own ship's displays. A long few seconds passed. "My sensor array is reporting several dozen small contacts near the edge of the solar system, past the orbit of what the humans call Mars." "Debris," Darren said immediately. "There is a great deal of old wreckage floating out there. Human probes, dead satellites, asteroid mining equipment they abandoned decades ago. It happens every few days. Your officers are jumping at shadows." "Perhaps," Alara said slowly, though she did not sound entirely convinced. "The contacts are moving in an unusual pattern, though, too organized for random debris. Run a deeper scan if it troubles you," Threx said, though there was a slight edge of impatience in his voice now. He did not want this meeting. The meeting he had looked forward to for weeks, interrupted by false alarms. "But I would remind everyone, we swept this system thoroughly before the invasion began. We know what is out there. Old machines, empty ships, nothing more." Olara nodded and turned her attention back to the table. Though a small part of her mind stayed on the strange contacts near Mars, filing the information away, the way a careful predator remembers every unusual sound in the grass, even the ones that turn out to be nothing. The meeting continued. Far beneath the Pacific Ocean, in a chamber the size of a small mountain carved out of solid rock beneath the seabed, massive doors made of reinforced alloy began to slide open. Water rushed through channels designed specifically to let it pass without damaging what lay inside. And what lay inside began slowly and silently to rise. The human fleet had not been built the way the CTH Dominion built their ships. The CTH favored size and raw power. Ships built to intimidate as much as to fight. Covered in weapons that could be seen from a great distance, meant to make an enemy feel small and afraid before a single shot was fired. Human engineers working with the small amount of alien technology recovered from a scout ship shot down in the first hours of the invasion, along with 60 years of their own research into physics that had never been made public, had built something different. They had built ships meant to be quiet. The lead vessel of the deep fleet was called the Resolute, and it did not look like much from the outside, long and narrow, dark gray, with none of the aggressive spikes or glowing weapon ports that decorated Cath warships. But inside its hull was a power core built on principles the Cath Dominion did not yet understand. A design based on captured technology that human scientists had improved upon in ways the original alien engineers had never imagined, because human engineers had a habit of taking things apart to see how they worked and then building something better. On the Resolute's bridge, Fleet Commander James Okafor watched the ocean water part above his ship's ascent path on the main view screen. Beside him, a younger officer named Lieutenant Sarah Voss checked the final systems. All primary weapons at full charge, she reported. Shield generators nominal. Cloaking field holding steady at 98% efficiency. 98 is enough, Okafor said. We are not trying to stay hidden forever, just long enough. He had been a young captain in the Atlas Guard, one of the few who had survived the destruction of that fleet near the moon. Pulled out at the last moment by an escape pod and brought into the secret program 2 weeks later when the surviving military leadership realized his tactical instincts were too valuable to lose. He remembered watching through the small window of his escape pod as Cath warships tore through ship after ship of his old fleet. Brave crews, who had no idea they were fighting a battle they were never meant to win, only meant to survive long enough to make the enemy believe humanity's fight was already finished. He had asked once why the Atlas Guard had not been told about the secret fleet, why they had been sent to die without knowing there was a larger plan. Admiral Cho had answered him honestly, which he had respected, even as the answer had been hard to hear. Because they needed to fight like it was the only fleet Earth had. She had said, a soldier who believes reinforcements are coming, fights differently than one who believes he is the last line of defense. We needed the enemy to see real desperation, real defeat. Actors cannot fake that convincingly enough. Only truth can. It had taken Akka for a long time to make peace with that answer. He was not sure he had fully made peace with it even now, but he understood it, and understanding was enough to keep him moving forward, especially today. Especially now when the moment the Atlas Guard had unknowingly bought with their lives was finally about to be spent. Status of the rest of the Deep Fleet, he asked. All underwater hangars reporting successful launch, Voss said. 240 ships from the Pacific facility alone. Combined with the fleets emerging from the outer solar system positions, total combat strength moving toward Rendezvous Point is, she paused, checking the number twice before saying it aloud, 3,112 vessels. Okafor allowed himself a small, tired smile. 3,000 ships. 2 years ago, when the program had begun in earnest, they had hoped for perhaps a tenth of that number. Built quietly using shared resources scraped together from nations who had finally truly for the first time in human history decided to work as one species instead of hundreds of competing countries. It had not been easy. There had been arguments, disagreements, moments when it seemed the whole secret alliance might fall apart under the weight of old rivalries and mistrust. But the threat from the stars had done something no war between humans had ever managed to do. It had reminded every nation on Earth that they were in the end the same fragile species standing on the same fragile planet, and that fragile things survived only by standing together. Rendezvous point in 6 minutes. Voss reported outer system fleets are matching our approach vector. Formation sunrise will be complete on schedule. Formation sunrise. Okafor repeated quietly, looking at the tactical display where thousands of small green markers were converging from every direction toward the 5 red markers hovering above the Pacific. Fitting name. Back on the Devourer of Light, the meeting had finally turned toward the topic of celebration. Captain Threx Valor called for a proper toast, a real one this time with ceremonial drink brought out by his aides in polished metal cups. The other 4 captains, still connected by hologram, raised their own cups in turn. And for a moment, the mood in 5 separate command centers was one of pure unguarded triumph. 41 worlds, THRE said, lifting his cup high. 1 worlds brought under the Dominion's banner, and this one taken with barely a scratch on our hulls. I will admit, when the Council first proposed sending 5 full command fleets to conquer a single primitive world, I thought it was excessive, overkill, even for a cautious species like ours. And now, Senth asked, grinning with all three eyes crinkled in amusement. "Now I think the council was wise to be thorough," THRE said, "better to end a threat completely than to leave any doubt behind. A wounded animal can still bite. A dead one cannot." "They are not dead yet," Vexilin said softly, his masked voice carrying an odd note that might have been caution, though it was hard to tell through the modulation. "Merely broken. There is still the matter of full occupation, full surrender ceremonies, the formal transfer of what remains of their government structures. These things take time, even after a victory, a formality," Doran said dismissively. "We have crushed their fleet, their orbital defenses, their cities. What is left to resist with a few hidden radios and some stubborn pride? Let them keep their pride. It changes nothing." "I agree," THRE said. "Within the week, we will begin bringing down the colony ships. Within the month, the first settlements will be established. Within the year, this planet will belong fully to the Dominion, and the species that called itself human will exist only as a labor class, learning to serve those who conquered them, the same as every other species we have brought under our banner." He raised his cup again. "To House Vaer, House Ka, House the House Kez, and House Moth. To victory," the others echoed, and 5 cups were raised in 5 different rooms across a distance that suddenly, without any of them realizing it, was about to become very small indeed. It was at that exact moment that every sensor board on all 5 mother ships began, almost in unison, to scream. On the Iron Verdict, Prees the sensor officer nearly fell out of his chair as dozens of new readouts flooded his console faster than he could process them. Not dozens, hundreds, then thousands. "Captain," he shouted, all pretense of calm gone from his voice. Multiple contacts emerging from cloak across every quadrant. "I am reading," he stopped, staring at the number in disbelief. "I am reading over 3,000 vessels, Captain. They are converging on our position from every direction, from the outer system, from beneath the ocean, from behind the moon." Sorantha's 3 eyes went wide, his cup of ceremonial drink slipping from his hand and shattering on the deck. Across the other 4 ships, the same panic was breaking out in the same instant. Sensor officers shouting warnings, alarms blaring red through corridors that moments ago had echoed with laughter and toasts to victory. Threx Valor stood so fast his chair toppled backward, staring at his own tactical display as it filled in a matter of seconds with more hostile contacts than he had seen in 40 years of military service combined. "That is impossible," he whispered, staring at the numbers. "That is not possible. Their fleet was destroyed. We destroyed it. We watched it burn." But the numbers on the screen did not care what he believed. They simply kept climbing. Ship after ship after ship, rising from the ocean, dropping in from behind the moon, sweeping in from the outer planets. All of them moving with terrible coordinated purpose toward 5 mother ships that only a moment ago had believed themselves standing at the center of an already finished war. The 5 captains who had gathered to celebrate the fall of Earth stared at their screens in stunned growing horror as the true face of the enemy they had underestimated finally after 40 long days began to reveal itself. To understand why this moment struck the 5 captains so hard, it helps to understand what each of them had built their careers on. Threx Valor had risen through the ranks of House Veer by being methodical, by never once launching a campaign without exhaustive scouting and preparation. 40 successful conquests had taught him that surprises belonged to the side that failed to plan properly, and he had always been the side that planned. To be surprised now, after weeks of careful observation, felt less like bad luck and more like a wound to something he had believed was a core part of who he was. Serenka had built his reputation on decisiveness, on being the captain who acted first and let others catch up. His 3 eyes had always given him an advantage other species lacked. A wider field of vision that had saved his ships more than once in tight engagements. But no number of eyes could see through a cloaking field built specifically to defeat his exact sensor arrays. And for the first time in his career, Soren found himself completely blind to a threat until it was already at his door. Eulers prided herself above all else on logic, on being the captain who saw patterns others missed. It was this same instinct for pattern recognition that had made her uneasy about the strange readings near Mars, even when her fellow captains dismissed them. She was, in a strange way, the least surprised of the five, because some quiet part of her analytical mind had already begun preparing for the possibility that something was wrong, even if she had not been able to name what it was in time to act on the feeling. Doru and Kez had spent 300 years being the immovable force in any battle. The captain, whose ship simply absorbed punishment and kept coming forward, his confidence had never been built on cleverness so much as raw endurance. And it was this same stubborn endurance that would in the coming minutes make his ship's defeat both slower and more painful than it needed to be. Because Darren did not know how to stop fighting, even when fighting had already lost its purpose. Vex Elon Moth, hidden always behind his silver mask, had built a career on caution, on being the captain, who asked the quiet questions no one else wanted to ask. It had made him unpopular among some of his peers who found his constant caveats tiresome during moments of celebration. Now watching the tactical display fill with thousands of hostile contacts, that same caution allowed him to process the disaster more quickly than his companions, because some part of him had never fully believed the celebration was premature. On the bridge of the Devourer of Light, Krev worked frantically to bring the ship's targeting systems back into some kind of order, sweat beading on his forehead despite the climate-controlled air. "Captain, I am attempting to establish shield priority protocols, but the sheer number of incoming contacts is overwhelming our processing capacity. I have never seen a tactical computer struggle this hard against a single engagement. Focus on the nearest threats first," Threx ordered, forcing his voice into something resembling calm. Even as his mind raced through options that seemed to shrink with every passing second. "Full defensive posture, signal the other captains. We regroup back to back and we hold until we understand what we are truly facing around him." The bridge, Clear's throat, crew of the Devourer of Light moved with the trained efficiency of soldiers who had served together through 40 previous campaigns. But efficiency alone could not manufacture time that did not exist. The human fleet was closing faster than any tactical model in the ship's database had predicted for a species with Earth's known technology level. And somewhere in the back of Threx's mind, a cold and unwelcome thought began to take shape. Perhaps Earth's known technology level was no longer the technology level they were actually facing. Below, in the ocean depths, more ships continued to rise. The Deep Fleet's second wave broke the surface nearly a full minute after the first, giving the illusion from a distance that the fleet was still growing even as its lead elements were already closing on their targets. A deliberate staggering of the launch sequence designed specifically to maximize the psychological impact of the reveal. Admiral Cho's planning teams had spent months debating whether such a staggered approach was necessary given that the tactical advantage of a single simultaneous launch might have been slightly greater. In the end, the psychological factor had won the argument. An enemy that watched wave after wave of ships emerge from a place they believed to be empty would spend precious seconds simply trying to process what they were seeing. Seconds that could mean the difference between an organized defense and total confusion. It was working exactly as planned. Alarms tore through the Devourer of Light. Red light washing over every corridor, every console, every stunned face on the bridge. Captain Thre's valor stood frozen for only a second. But a second was a long time for a commander who had spent 40 years learning never to freeze at all. He forced himself to move, snapping orders before his mind had even finished catching up with what his eyes were showing him. Full shields. All weapon batteries to ready status. I want a real count, not an estimate. How many ships are we facing? His tactical officer, a wiry alien named Krev, worked frantically at his station, fingers flying across controls that had never before needed to process this much incoming data at once. 3,100 confirmed, Captain, and the number is still climbing. They are converging from the outer solar system from behind the moon. And Krebs' voice cracked slightly. From directly beneath us, from the ocean itself. The ocean, Threx repeated, disbelief thick in his voice. We scanned that ocean 100 times. There was nothing there. There was something there, Krev said. Something built to hide from exactly the kind of scans we were running. Captain, whatever this is, it was built specifically to be invisible to our sensors. This was not luck. This was planned. On the holographic display connecting all 5 captains, panic had replaced the earlier laughter entirely. Sorintha's 3 eyes darted rapidly between different readouts on his own bridge. His earlier confidence completely gone. Threx. My sensors say the same thing. Thousands of contacts converging fast and my officers cannot get a clean read on their weapon capabilities. The cloaking technology alone is beyond anything we catalogued from this species. This is not possible. Doru and KZ growled, his battle-scarred face twisted with something between fury and disbelief. We crushed their fleet. I watched the Atlas Guard burn with my own sensors. There was nothing left. Apparently, Olara said, her voice tight and controlled despite the chaos around her. There was a second fleet, one we never detected, one built, it seems, specifically so that we would never detect it until it was far too late to matter. Vexilon Moth said nothing for a moment. His masked face turned toward his own tactical display, studying the approaching wall of green contacts with what might have been the alien equivalent of grudging respect buried somewhere beneath the shock. They let us win, he said quietly. They let us believe we had already won so that we would gather here together, comfortable, unprepared. This entire war, the version of it we believed we were fighting, was a performance staged for our benefit. Enough philosophy, Threx snapped, though the sharpness in his voice was as much fear as anger. All ships break formation immediately. I want defensive spacing, full power to shields, and someone get me a clean tactical picture before he never finished the sentence. The lead elements of the human fleet arrived at optimal firing range at the exact same moment across all 5 cath positions. A level of coordination that would have been difficult even for ships that had trained together for years, let alone for a fleet built in secret from dozens of formerly rival nations. But 2 years of joint drills conducted deep underground and far out in the solar system, away from any eyes that might report back to the enemy, had built something the Cath Dominion had never accounted for. A human military force that had learned at last to move as one. The Resolute led the charge from beneath the ocean, rising out of the waves and a curtain of white spray. Its weapon systems already charged and locked before it had even fully cleared the water. Fleet Commander Okafor watched the tactical display fill with targeting solutions, dozens of them, hundreds, as every human ship in range found its mark on the 5 stunned motherships above. Multi-vector focus fire. All ships target the flagship first, Okafor ordered, his voice calm in the way that only comes from years of imagining this exact moment, running it over and over in simulations until the real thing felt almost familiar. Concentrate on the Devourer of Light. Take the head off the snake before it can coordinate a response. Weapons locked. Voss confirmed. All batteries report firing solution ready. Fire. Space around the 5 mother ships erupted into light. Thousands of human weapon batteries built using technology reverse-engineered from a single captured Cath scout ship and then improved far beyond the original design by human engineers who refused to simply copy what they found. Unleashed their first true volley of the war. The Devourer of Light's shields, the strongest of any ship in the CTH fleet, absorbed the initial impact, flaring bright blue-white across its massive hull. But the sheer volume of incoming fire was staggering. More concentrated firepower than the ship had ever